Welcome and thank you so much for joining us for this Profiles of Inclusive Excellence. My name is Tiara Thomas, and I proudly serve as president of the African American Alumni Association here at CWRU. Um, in case you didn't know, the African American Alumni Association was officially established in October 2009, and our purpose is to provide support and networking opportunities to African American alumni of the university. We work to provide a forum for the university to recruit students and foster friendship amongst those connected with the university. So, before we begin today's program, just a few housekeeping notes. You will find that you are muted by default, and we do ask that you remain muted to limit background noise during the program. If you have any questions, please utilize the chat feature and we will do our best to get those answered for you. So that we know who you are, we welcome you to rename yourself by clicking on participants, finding your name, and then using the more option and selecting rename. Finally, we ask that you please turn on your video if you can. We'd like to see your smiling faces. And with that, I am so happy to welcome you to this installment of Profiles of Inclusive Excellence, which is a virtual series in collaboration with the African American Alumni Association, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusive Engagement, and the Africana Studies program to highlight the work and research of our African American faculty. Our host for this evening will be Dr. Heather Burton. She is Associate Vice President and Senior Director for Faculty and Institutional Diversity with CWRU, specializing in gender and racial equity. And with that, I now turn the program over to Dr. Burton.
Thank you, Tiara. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. I think one of my favorite things of working at the institution is the Profiles of Inclusive Excellence, because it's an opportunity that I typically get to talk more with, I should say, people that I work with on a daily basis. And so not only do I learn more information about them, but so does our audience. And so Profiles of Inclusive Excellence is that opportunity to just talk to our Black faculty on campus. And one of the things is that some of you know that when I approached some folks about doing the Profiles of Excellence, Inclusive Excellence, it was specifically to interview Black faculty, because in the community I kept hearing, and from alumni, that Case doesn't have any Black faculty. And I was like, well, yeah, Case has some Black faculty. Our numbers are not where we want them to be, but we do have some Black faculty. And I am proud to say that in 3 years, we've been doing the Profiles of Inclusive Excellence, and we have not repeated our Black faculty, and we do this monthly. And so tonight we have with us Dr. Ronald Hickman. And Dr. Hickman, I'm so glad that you were able to clear your schedule and join us this evening. And we have a tradition here with Profiles of Inclusive Excellence. And that tradition is, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Brown Sugar, with Sanaa Lathan and Taye Diggs. And so you remember throughout that movie, there was this theme about when did you fall in love with hip hop? Now, every person that joins Profiles of Excellence, I pose that question, but I pose that question in relationship to your academic discipline. However, I've said to you previously that you never know what happens on Profiles. And so Profiles brings out some hidden talents from our faculty that we learned. For example, Dr. Jolly, I asked, when did you fall in love with hip hop? And Dr. Jolly started beatboxing. Dr. Adrian Fletcher, she started giving lyrics to rap songs. And so I never want to exclude anyone from the question of hip hop, but the question is, for your opening remarks, and I know you probably want to thank people and that sort of thing, but for your opening remarks, when did you fall in love with nursing?
My goodness. Well, you know what? We have some talented colleagues, don't we, at Case? I'm not that gifted to be put on the spot to provide you lyrics of my favorite hip hop song that might dovetail to when I fell in love with nursing, or break out a poem. But I'm seeing colleagues on like David Burks, who used to be breakout in spontaneity in our cafeterias with a verse or two. So maybe he could help me out later on.
He looks like he's in a recording studio also.
So,
are you in a recording studio, David Burks?
It looks that way, doesn't it? Yeah, no, it's
yes.
just the magic. It's just the magic. It's
okay.
the inside on the outside. That's all.
This is what we do with profiles too. Sometimes, Dr. Hickman, I have people just bum rush your interview and I ask them questions from the audience. But needless to say, back to the focus of you.
Yeah. So, that's an interesting question. What did I fall in love with nursing? I won't even tell you that I fell in love with nursing as a child, because as a child, nursing was not something that I was particularly attuned to as a particular occupation or a career choice. So I fell in love with nursing relatively late, if you want to think about it. And when people are experiencing sort of their career choice or career planning, it was well beyond my even my college years. I was actually graduating from Case Western Reserve University as an undergraduate, transitioning, looking to go to medical school, and got waitlisted and had to find something to do in that what we now call a gap year, possibly. And I had the fortunate run-in with Dr. Patricia McDonald, who in my senior year came to a breakfast from the old Office of Multicultural Affairs, who some of you folks may know that. I think at that time it was being managed by Charlize Pratt, and before that it was Dean Margaret Bolding. But I was at a breakfast, and Patricia McDonald, African-American alum, first PhD graduate, African-American graduate of the PhD program in nursing here at Case Western Reserve University, said, had I ever considered being a nurse? And I told her emphatically, no. And I didn't really want to think about it at that time. And I thought I was going to be kind, have my breakfast, have some interesting conversation with this delightful older woman who was trying to persuade me to become a nurse. And I was getting up towards the end of that breakfast and was ready to head out the door. And Patricia grabs me and said, no, wait, you're coming to the School of Nursing and you're going to fill out an application. I filled out the application and I thought, well, I'll just do it just to humor this very kind, gentle, but persuasive faculty member. But I'm glad that she did, because my love of nursing probably would have never happened until she exposed me to the opportunities, to expose me to conversations that not only led me to apply, but then, encouraged me to become a nurse. And that love of nursing was a real awakening that, in some of the most private and most vulnerable moments of dealing with all individuals, a nurse is there. A nurse is there when we welcome the first breaths of life, and also there at those last moments and last breaths of life as well. And there is so much in terms of what nurses do. There's the science, there's the sort of medical or nursing care that oftentimes people think about. But there's the art and the compassion that I'd have to tell you has allowed me to fall in love with being a nurse and being in those vulnerable spaces. Yes, for some it's uncomfortable, but for me, it's almost like a spiritual connection to human beings, that vulnerability and that ability to help with heal and ability to help minimize suffering has really, over the years, helped me kind of fall in and out of love with nursing over and over again. So, Heather, I tell you that long, convoluted story because I didn't necessarily land into nursing straight away, but I'm glad that I was open and receptive to people encouraging me to do that, because I may not have never fallen in love with something that I really think is one of the most critical roles in healthcare systems. And people don't think about that. I mean, I'm just always impressed that there's over 4 million nurses in the United States. We're the largest workforce of healthcare providers in the United States and worldwide. And I can't see why we have a shortage, because I have fallen in love with this discipline.
Yeah, I love that. I have so many questions that are running through my mind right now, but I do want to encourage our audience to also put questions in the chat. I will take questions from the chat as well. So if you have questions for Ron, please put those in the chat. Ron, you said a couple things throughout, and I think one of the things that you mentioned, which is interesting, and in your bio, it talks about your interest in biomedical research, but Margaret Bolden, and I hadn't heard that name in a while. And I was thinking about who this person was, and I can say that she was over, if I'm correct, the case summer programs. The one was for engineering, and I went through three of those programs for biomedical engineering. Would you believe that, Ron? And so actually at Case Western Reserve, I went through three programs as a high school student for biomedical engineering. And then I got to Ohio State and changed my major completely. So that's a whole nother story. But in that, here you are, this high school student attending Case Western Reserve University. And then you stay at Case Western Reserve for a master's, stay at Case Western Reserve for your PhD. What has it been like trying to make that transition from undergrad to PhD to faculty where everyone's known you as Ron the undergrad?
That's a great question, Heather. First of all, I wish I had some foresight that this is where I would be almost 30 years later. When I transitioned from a high schooler from Youngstown to undergrad here, I never imagined being a faculty member. Matter of fact, I see Dr. Jackson Wright just signed on. I'm going to throw him a shout out because along the way, it was folks like Dr. Wright who are scientists, who are this blended role of scientist, clinician, researcher that allowed me to see that that was a possibility. But when I came into this, I didn't really think about negotiating the fact that I was going to be in a faculty role. Matter of fact, a lot of what I maybe this is true of others who are spotlighted in these profiles of inclusive excellence. I have leaned into the uncertainty. I have leaned into the advice of mentors. I have heeded their words and taken their motivation. I certainly didn't, when I was an undergrad, didn't see myself getting a master's in nursing. I didn't even want to be a nurse. And then I didn't even know nurses earned PhDs, and I didn't know nurses did science, and didn't really understand that as a young Black person from Youngstown that I could be a faculty member at the same institution that granted me all of my degrees. And so when you ask that complex question about how did I negotiate that, I guess I did it along the way. I've also had some great experience of tremendous support here. But like many of you too, I've experienced some of the downsides of being a racial minority, African-American person, a Black person here on this campus, like we see in our community. So negotiating those transitions, I had to be extremely thoughtful, thoughtful about how I interact with my colleagues, both in terms of those who were my faculty advisors, teachers, and mentors who have now become mentors and colleagues and friends, and some are on here today. And so I think I've just been thoughtful. I've been open. I've been authentic. I've also tried to gain support from others outside of this institution, because oftentimes when you're within an institution, sometimes you can experience some challenges from being homegrown. And so I've been thoughtful. I've been open. And I've leaned into just a wonderful support network that I think is really important as we think about being Black academics. No matter if you're coming in a system that you were raised up in, if you will, academically, or you're coming into that system, but leaning into the support of others.
Yeah, one of the things that you said that really stands out to me is the fact that a lot of the doors that you walk through were because of mentors. And I think very often we underestimate what mentoring does for our career choices and how we succeed. I always joke that all of my degrees came from someone saying, Heather, you're going to get. And Heather saying, no, I'm not going to do that. And then eventually I end up doing that. But that's because I'm like you. Well, not like you, but I was interested in theater. Theater is what I did. Acting is what I did. I left Ohio State to pursue acting. And so that was my number one goal, my number one choice. But I had mentors to say, hey, you need to get this master's degree. Hey, you need to get this PhD. And in that, what are some of the ways that you've mentored students within your own role and within your own profession? And what satisfaction do you get from that? Why mentoring? And especially in the field that you're in.
Wow, man. I'm going to take a moment. For me, mentoring, I've had great mentors. I'm going to rattle off a few of them. I think if the Dr. Douglas is Dr. Sarah Douglas, I like to, shout her out for a moment. Folks like Jackson Wright, who's mentored from afar, who's really showed me what a career could look like as a biomedical researcher. Barbara Daly was my dissertation advisor, Patricia McDonald, Mae Weichel. What I'm going to say to you is mentors have come in all shapes and forms, but all of them have done, I think, some commonalities in that is open doors, sponsored opportunities, believed in me when I did not even believe in myself. They actually created some cognitive dissonance. And it was helpful cognitive dissonance. It challenged me logically to explore some things that maybe emotionally I was fearful of, or because I hadn't seen it, I was resistant to. But I am so thankful because those mentors have not only opened doors, sponsored me, pushed me through those doors, sometimes dragging me through those doors. But they believed in me in incredible ways. And so when I think about mentoring, I don't only think about mentoring our students, our undergrads and graduate students. I mentor what I would say people. I hope to inspire people to think beyond what their current realities are, to be able to see to see whatever that goal is, that dream, and be able to reach for that dream. I see that as being, a good mentor. Mentors are, I think, fundamental. They do some really important tasks, like your mentors told you, Heather, to come back and get a degree. Sometimes they challenge our realities. They create opportunities, financial opportunities, experiential opportunities. They endorse us and validate us in spaces that we need to sometimes be in to move forward. I do that, I think, because when I look around in communities like Case Western Reserve and higher education and lots of other spaces, there are not many people like many of us on the screen here today. And I want to give back because somebody has given so much to me. And I'm hoping that, I'm bringing forward a few more people that will have similar perspectives. And that, as one mentor tells me, it only takes a drop to create a ripple, and that ripple turns into a wave. And I've held on to that sort of idea, if you will, that every little impact, every person that I can help them achieve whatever their goal is or whatever their goals are, that I'm having a positive impact. So for me, mentoring has been fundamental. I find myself spending a lot of time, both in my formal role as an associate dean for research, mentoring people across career stages, thinking about career occupations, going after their goals, whether it's a research grant or trying to get to the next rung of the academic ladder, or oftentimes just thinking about what possibilities lie ahead. So Heather, for me, it's been a true core value, which is mentoring, because I have been the recipient of some really powerful mentoring along the way.
Yeah, and I know, and I can share an example of when we were at the Envision weekend last school year in August 23, is that there were students there who were interested in nursing, and you took an initiative to begin working with those students and share information. And so it's who you are. And so I'd say to the listening audience, it's not that Ron is just talking. That's a part of who he is when we're talking about mentoring. But kind of to switch gears, and I do want to say this again, please make sure that you put question in the chats. We will take questions from the chat if you have any, but let's go back a little bit, Ron. Let's go back to little Ron and tell us about who is little Ron growing up and what foundations did you get from home. You mentioned Youngstown, coming from Youngstown and then moving to Case Western Reserve. But who was young Ron?
That's a great question. So I have to say, young Ron is a product of paternal grandparents who left the South from sharecropping families in South Carolina, who my surname Hickman comes from the plantation owner in South Carolina. And if you're familiar with around Conway or Myrtle Beach, the county there is Hickman County. So my grandparents came to the North looking for opportunity. They were domestic help. They were the live-in gardener and nanny for a physician. And this physician ended up helping my grandmother learn a little bit more and to have an occupation as a phlebotomist in a hospital. What I'm trying to get at here is that for my family, the value of education was immensely important. That in our roots, each successive generation was meant to hopefully do better than the one before. And a strong work ethic. I just remember my mom and my grandmother sitting me at the kitchen table. I hated cursive writing. They don't even teach cursive writing. And my grandmother could lean into me because she always knew that trigger point about what would make me, be more engaged in my scholarly work and activities. And she said, well, you got to learn how to write checks for me one day. And, things like that along the way really shaped me, having a supportive community. I come from a small community, but, in my neighborhood, my kindergarten teacher was the neighbor. And everyone kind of looked out for you, as many people did in the era where I was raised and so forth. But that sense of community also gave us a sense of pride. That sense of community also had a sense of collective education, a collective investment for who I want. I remember leaving to go to college here thinking I could not let my community down. Everyone was so proud. Everybody was proud. You got people who never finished high school or may not have had a middle school education, but the community, neighbors all knew and celebrated. And so for me, when I got to Case Western Reserve, things didn't go right at all. I mean, not because I kicked it and partied and hung out with some of the folks on the screen, just because I came from a school district where I didn't have books to take home, that we did homework at school, that teachers allowed us to play, to refine our bid whist skills and our spade skills, card games, rather than focus on trying to manage the classroom. And so I graduated with great high school grades, but realized I was not a little, but I was substantially behind. And I struggled. And what I'm trying to get at in this story is that the community investment, that spirit of just not only letting folks down, but having support, but also having the discipline to stick with it, to persevere, and knowing that, people like my grandparents moved to the South under not so great conditions to take employment where I'm sure they wanted other positions besides being the domestic help. And I knew I had this opportunity and I was going to make something of that opportunity. So for me, growing up as a little kid, that this sense of a collective community investment, I was sort of disciplined by my community, my immediate family, but the neighborhood, which was something that I take great pride in today. And all of these things have really, I think, helped shape that little Ron, Heather, that you were asking about. But honestly, as I've matured, I think about has really shaped the man I am today.
Yeah, and I think often I ask that question or some form of that question to really get us thinking. And then when we think about it, is how much our childhood impacted who we are today and what that looked like. One of the things that you mentioned was collective community. And so in collective community, how do you think that plays out for you today in your current role?
It's a great question. I think I've found, a collective community in terms of mentors and colleagues that have been a wonderful support system. I think coming up the ranks, I have oftentimes felt there was deficits and deficiencies in that community for folks like myself. And so, have really worked, I'd say diligently to try to have an impact on the community, to really reinforce our values of diversity, inclusivity, and belongingness. And I think we're seeing that benefit, at least within the School of Nursing. We have a very diverse faculty in terms of sexual gender orientation, of ethnicity. I mean, still today, the nursing workforce is predominantly white and female. And we have, I think a fair number in terms of diversity, in terms of gender minority diversity, males and persons of color across all ages and all types of sexual orientation. So that hasn't always been the case here at Case Western, and particularly within this academic unit. And our students are reflecting the diversity of our faculty and our staff as well.
Yeah, it's I share very often in the interrupting bias training that I do for hiring that, Ron, you'll appreciate this. A couple months ago, I had a minor procedure and I woke up from anesthesia and I had a male nurse and I tried to recruit him for faculty in the School of Nursing. I tell people don't wake up from anesthesia trying to recruit, but that's how important CASE is and me seeing diversity within our work environment. But with your high school and coming out of high school, and there were the disadvantages of the textbooks, not being academically prepared as other students. How did you combat that? And then the second part of that question, or the first part of that question, is why Case Western Reserve? Why come to Case? Because I know I went through 3 summer programs for Case, and it was not on my list to even apply for.
Well, so I'll start with the why Case Western Reserve question. Actually, when I was a high school student searching for, undergraduate homes or institutions to go to, my grandfather became ill on the job and got rushed to University Hospitals Cleveland. And being at University Hospitals Cleveland, I got to see, healthcare environment. But I remember there was a physician, maybe a cardiologist, since he was in for a heart attack, actually, said, you're a really smart guy. You should consider CASE. And actually, that's what put CASE on my radar. I explored Carnegie Mellon and Miami of Ohio, quite a few different schools. But CASE became on my map for that one unfortunate but fortuitous situation of having a sick grandparent. And it just stuck with me. As I was getting better packages other places, I would come and visit. And it was people like Dean Margaret Bolding, and who I met, who helped convince me and my parents that Case Western was a good fit for me. I'm looking at, there's people like Michelle Felder, Nikita Jamison, or Griffey, and others who were African-American students who were already on campus. And they were saying, you need to come here because we'll take care of you. And that was one of the things I was sold on. I mean, yeah, I broadly, I probably wasn't very convinced about Case Western, but the investments of Dean Bolding, and talking to students that looked like me who said, if you come here, we got you. And that was one of the things that Dean Bolding at that time was very instrumental about. She had these summer programs. She also made sure that there was peer supports. I'm looking at David, because David, I think, came in after me, Burks, and we kind of tried to role model that for people like you, David, who were after me. But this even predates me. I can think of Dean Patterson, who talked about how other older African-American alums did the same thing. And so for me, that sense of community comes back again, where it was like, we have a community, albeit small, but we will support you should you come here. And that was instrumental for me, impactful for me.
And so there's a question that kind of goes with that I'm going to take from the chat, and it's actually from David Burks. Thank you, Ron, for all your mentorship, even as an undergrad. My question is, do you have any regrets about only matriculating at Case Western Reserve University?
I mean, gosh, I mean, in hindsight, I mean, I don't know. I think it's worked out pretty well. And David, this is what I'll say to you. You know, I've heard that, when it's particularly going up in an academic faculty role, that people would advise people not to stay at the same places that they've earned most of their degrees. And I'm going to be candid here for a moment. And Heather knows I worked on some grants to do some faculty hiring initiatives and other things. But if you look at the literature, that works for certain types of people, majority folks, Caucasian folks. But for African Americans and any persons of color in higher education, there are not too many people who have skipped around and moved different academic places in terms of degrees, but also even coming up in terms of tenure track or being tenure eligible. There's something to be said, and this comes from the literature, about staying in place, being able as a person of color to develop that social support system. And sometimes that's both with your formal support, such as mentors, advisors, but also being anchored to a community, something that also provides some restoration to you as a person, or gives you agency or mission in a different way. And sometimes what we've seen in the literature that even with graduate students of color, sometimes they don't have as productive of careers in terms of manuscripts and things of that nature. It takes them a little longer, and that translates even to sometimes slower productivity for faculty researchers when they move around of color, because they're not oftentimes welcomed in those communities right away, those new institutions. They're not oftentimes given the sponsorship or, come on and join on this, be a co-author on this publication. So, for me, a majority of folks, even when I look around campus, it's not a surprise that some of the African-American faculty are faculty that are also homegrown here and other places. Because in a sense, you've got a support system, it's working, and sometimes it takes too much effort to possibly, to gain some of the benefits of relocating sometimes. But there are people who do it. But at large, when you look at sort of the evidence, there are a lot more individuals of color who are or racial minorities in higher education. They oftentimes will find a place, stay in place, and will excel oftentimes in place, particularly if they found a good support system. So to answer your question, David, no, I in hindsight, I'm glad I did what I did, but I also have been very thoughtful on establishing a network of collaborators, of mentors, of colleagues far beyond Case Western Reserve University. And to be an academic researcher, you're going to have to do that anyway to be successful.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier, you talked about the collective community and what that looks like for you to have that community. And I think that's what you've done in order to be successful. And as you said, no matter who you are, and especially when we're talking about working in higher education, the academy, is that you've got to establish a network beyond your institution if you want to do certain things. And I laugh at myself, my master's and PhD both came from Cleveland State, but that was because of the support. And that was because someone from the PhD program recognized from the master's program and said, you're getting the PhD now. I won't go through that whole story either, Ron, but of course, me being Heather, I said, no, I'm not getting a PhD. Eventually, a few years later, Dr. Larry Terry, I will always be forever grateful to the late Dr. Larry Terry, but I ended up getting that PhD. And so here's another question for you from Marilyn Maltsby. What is the nurse's role in community health today? And how do nurses engage in the community?
So it's interesting. And thank you, Dr. Mobley, for that question. When I think about nursing has always been about public health nursing or community nursing. And I think about even if you want to think broadly about Florence Nightingale or Lillian Wald as famous community or public health nurse and a few, well, 5 decades or more ago, who did some really great work on social determinants of health. And then, so we've always had this, we've been rooted in the community. And then I have to say, medicine shifted to being in hospitals, and policy and funding shifted to tertiary acute care. And so did nursing. We then focused on training nurses to largely take care of people, sick people in hospitals. And without, I think, the needed attention to nurses also providing care outside of the hospital. Currently, with some national reports like the Future of Nursing report by the National Academy of Medicine, there's been this, again, the pendulum oftentimes swings in just dynamic ways. Now we've kind of swung the pendulum in the opposite direction. Now, nursing organizations want to push heavily nursing out in the community. And I understand that. It's prevention, it's promotion, it's mental health services, addiction and behavioral health. All those things are needed. But I'm also seeing this over or maybe aggressive play for public health or community nursing when millions of Americans still need hospital-based care. And so I think we need to do both. I think there are spaces for nurses to be both in the traditional hospital settings. We need that. I mean, all of us. I get sick. Dr. Burton, you just mentioned waking up from anesthesia.
Yeah.
Nurses there. But we really swung that, even shifting our clinical experiences now to mostly focus on out-of-hospital care. And most Americans will find themselves needing some hospital-based care. The role of nurses, I think, is going to continue to increase in the community. And I hope to see it, we know it increased. We know nurses and nurse practitioners penetrate areas that, I know there's some physicians on here, they penetrate areas at a level of density that our physician colleagues don't. And that's true. When you think about nurse practitioners, or you think about, or nurses of color, we can tell you that those nurses of color and nurse practitioners practice oftentimes in urban settings and rural settings at a greater quantity than sometimes our physician quantity could be the fact that we're just larger in number too. But we offer, I think, those types of preventative health promotion, health education services in places that oftentimes physicians don't practice. We do churches. We do retail clinics. We do school nursing. We do a lot of mobile clinics and vans. So I do think that there is a shift, a needed shift in the delivery of primary care and health promotion services. But I would say, as an acute care, critical care nurse practitioner who's always been hospital-based, I don't want us to forget about the millions of us that will require some level of hospital-based care too.
So you mentioned a number earlier, 4 million nurses.
Mm-hmm.
And so with this number, why do you think there is this shortage, this idea or this concept of there being a shortage to the field of nursing?
Well, Heather, I would say it's not a concept. There is an actual shortage of nurses in the United States. Prior to the pandemic, we were approximately 1.5 million nurses short. I can't tell you post-pandemic where the numbers are. Initially, around 2020 and 2021, we saw an uptick in individuals entering the profession. But then there was a set of numbers or statistics that just came out a couple of days ago. So I feel like you planted this question to the audience. Dr. Burton did not.
I did not. I go with whatever the interviewers say, and so that you gave that. So this is where the question is coming from, especially for those of us who are on the call who are not in the medical field.
Yeah, so we were pre-pandemic $1.5 million, 1.5 million nurse short. Where we're at now, I don't know per se, but I can tell you, nurse burnout is high. People leaving the discipline or profession is also high. And what we started to see for the first time in the United States that we haven't seen in decades is a decrease in the enrollments into undergraduate programs for nursing. This comes at a time where nursing is in high demand and our public health infrastructure really does need that. The last estimates that I've seen in terms of Ohio, we are short at least 350,000 nurses to date. And that's, again, pre-pandemic numbers. What I'm going to try to tell you is, I think there's a lot of things going on. When we think about STEM education, nursing is excluded from STEM education. Therefore, there is not a lot of federal appropriations for scholarships and other things. Certainly, nursing should be a STEM. It is foundationally based on chemistry, maths, and biological sciences. I think that's one piece. Changing the perception of the discipline and the career pathways is another. I think there needs to be legislation. I think there are some acts right now by Representative Lauren Underwood right now trying to provide more monies for nurse educators, because as well as there is a shortage of clinical nurses, there's a shortage of nurse educators. That is another bottleneck to helping us, increase this pipeline or the throughput of nurses. Just this week, the American Association of Colleges of Nursing released a report saying that over 65,000 applicants, qualified applicants who wanted to be nurses, were turned down because of not enough nurse faculty. One of the things that happens is that we oftentimes don't have industry equivalent pay for nurse educators. So nurse educators, or those who are qualified to be nursing faculty, remain sometimes in clinical positions because it's more financially sound for them to do so. And that's something that I think at a macro level, we're trying to address.
Thank you. And thank you for my education on that, because I was curious to that. But one question I want to ask also is, when you think about that, is very often I've heard students say that, especially students looking at medical school, they wish they had actually gotten a degree in nursing before medical school or anatomy. If there was somebody on the call, would you agree with that, or would you disagree, or what are your thoughts behind it?
Well, I'll just tell you, people are thinking through or their own responses. I've seen a number of individuals and colleagues who have nurses who have become physicians along the way.
So, and then the next question is coming from our chat, and I want to make sure we get these in. Is there any correlation in nursing school enrollment and medical school enrollment?
I've never looked at it. And usually when I'm looking at sort of like our discipline or professions numbers, I've never done the head-to-head comparison. I think there's a number of drivers of why people might want to go to med school versus nursing school, but I definitely will take a look at it, Michelle. I know that there's some physician colleagues on the call here. I'm not sure what medical school enrollment numbers are looking like, to see if they running parallel with what we're seeing in nursing, or doing something a little bit different. So,
okay. And then our next question is, my daughter is currently in nursing school and due to graduate in June. Should she continue to pursue the next level of nursing, or look to pursue employment and gain additional hands-on experience? She is torn between this decision. What advice can you share for Angela Carpenter?
Well, there's the academician of me who says, get her on the case, send her my way. But, there's nothing wrong with getting some experience. I mean, I kind of did both at the same time. So, as soon as I was able to sit for my licensure, I went ahead and took a job in the ICU. And I also concurrently enrolled into a master's program to become an acute care nurse practitioner. So I do think you can do the best of both. You don't have to do one or the other. I'm looking at Valerie Tolley. I know she's a pediatric nurse as well. And so I don't know, Val, if you have any comment that you'd like to share in response to Angela's question.
Well, in the past, and I've taught in the pediatric nurse practitioner program for about 20 years, but I haven't taught um, in that program for a couple years. But I always encourage the students to have some sort of experience when they come into the nurse practitioner program. And that could be any kind of experience. There was a time, and it's hard to believe, where it was really hard to get a registered nurse position. So I even had some students that ended up working in like a nursing home or something like that. But it helps you to place the context. But on the same token, I have had a few, but very few students that have come straight out of nursing school and have come into the program. But I would say a vast majority of them do, start getting some experience, but take classes part-time. And I think it's very doable. And I just want you to know that they do have what's called intensive courses that your daughter could sign up for. And what's wonderful about that is all the didactic portion of the course is taught within a certain period of time. So if it's 2 credits, it's 4 days straight. If it's a 3 credit course, it's like 5, 6 days. And then the assignments are due later on. And that makes it a lot more doable for the students. So that might be a consideration. But please have your daughter come and talk to one of the faculty members. We'd be happy to speak with her about her options there. Thank you.
Well, thank you,
Thank you.
Valerie. I appreciate you coming in and on the spot responding and doing a little bit of a plug that I wouldn't have felt comfortable doing. I appreciate you doing that.
Well, Ron, this is your space. You can do whatever you want to do on Profiles of Inclusive Excellence. It's your space. But I do want to ask, why chronic disease and end of life?
Why chronic disease and end of life?
How did you get into being interested in those two areas?
My goodness, I will just tell you, I had the fortunate time to be advised by Dr. Barbara Daly when I was a doctoral student. And if you know Barbara Daly's work, she's a ethicist by training, who's focused a lot of her work in the clinical management of individuals who are termed chronically critically ill or long-term ICU patients. And within that target population of long-term ICU patients, a significant proportion of them will likely die within the first year of being, their episode of a chronic critical illness. That coupled with having my own personal event at a particular point in my life. When I was a doctoral student, I was actually initially paired with Dr. John Clossy, a gentleman who looked at molecular mechanisms of antioxidants, inflammation, and oxidative stress. Very molecular. That's what I'll tell you. Very molecular based. I got married in 2006. My grandmother broke her hip, ended up landing into the ICU, had alveolar hemorrhaging. My grandfather developed a pneumonia, also landed in the ICU, a small community hospital. Now my father's parents are both in the ICU at the same time. I'm watching my dad struggle, trying to get information about both his mom, who's on a ventilator, his dad is on a ventilator and dialysis machine for acute kidney failure and respiratory failure, et cetera. And what Barb at that time was studying was how do physicians and nurses communicate prognosis, the state of an individual's illness, their acuity, and in an evidence-based, structured way. And what I was seeing with my parents and with my grandparents is that, we couldn't get information. And we were being labeled because we were asking for information on a regular basis. And we became that family, that if you're in healthcare, sometimes we label groups and label people because they're that needy family, or they want information from us, or we want to talk to the doctor. And when I went to the literature, that's what I was trained to do, is go to a textbook or something to see what was the evidence-based practices for my colleagues in nursing about communicating with families in the ICU. There really wasn't much evidence there. And to be honest with you, that switched my whole focus of my study. I thought I was just going to spend some practicum hours with Dr. Daly and Dr. Douglas in their intensive communication study. And then I became just, I don't know, that lived experience changed me, and it made me understand the importance of why we need to study end of life decision making, because I had a personal experience now. And then as an ICU nurse, it actually made me more sensitive that in my space, we deal with a lot of death and dying, that families were oftentimes invisible to most nurses and most clinicians, and they became visible when we needed something from them. We need you to sign an informed consent. We need a diagnostic or surgical procedure. And we really didn't have a good handle on how can nurses and other providers provide information and supports holistically to people who are at the most vulnerable, who need information and are making some of the most gut-wrenching decisions for someone else. And so for me, it all came together. It was unexpected, but sometimes life happens like that. And it has been something that I've been sort of passionate in trying to fill in that evidence base. And we're making some headway in doing that. But that's how I focused on end of life decision making and individuals who are living with more than one chronic conditions. Because in the ICU, people aren't just coming in with hypertension. They're coming in with hypertension, diabetes, a stroke, and everything else. And so multiple chronic conditions kind of fall or oftentimes lead to higher morbidity, and maybe even, increases their risk of, death in the ICU. Yeah. And that's how I landed in that space, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's not a conversation piece at parties, but it's something, it's not very light, but it's something that if you're in that space and if you ever have had a loved one, and it's one of these things that I would say to audiences like this one, I study something around decision making that all of us will have to use the information, whether you're going to make a decision for a loved one or a loved one will make a decision for you. We want to make sure as healthcare providers that there is evidence-based practices and supports and resources available so that whether it's you or someone will be making those decisions are best supported in an effective way.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, because I've had to make those decisions. So with my father. So thank you for that. But I'm going to ask one other question from the chat, and then I have another question. Then we're going to close out for the evening. But with all the challenges that people of color face, and from a nursing perspective, how do you recommend that people advocate for their loved ones?
Oh, this is, to me, it's, the best things I can say for advocating for loved ones is oftentimes, if you can, I'm thinking about some of the caregiving literature of my colleague, Dr. Douglas, if you can be a part of those conversations. And now with technology, that means, you can oftentimes Zoom in or teleconference in on a platform, or now with the EHRs, electronic health records. But, I think we need to think about working together as a team, and you can advocate for someone by being present. That's one piece, because oftentimes I know what it's like to be a patient. Sometimes I hear something. I hear some of the information, but if I had my spouse or someone else with me, they can help me process that information or help me think through some of the things or choice options. So I would say, if you have the ability to bring a friend, a family member, or you can attend and be of support for someone. Also, I like to think about making sure you have documentation. There's with the electronic medical records, you have access to your data right away. But sometimes if you can, sometimes these EHRs or electronic health records don't speak to one another. So print out some of those things, create a little binder of some things that go. So take it with you to your doctor's appointment, to your specialist appointment. I think you can be your own advocate, but you can also help to advocate for other people using that strategy as well. So I'll stop there because I know you have another question.
Yes. And this question is to take us, I'm going to read this, but it's interesting that you say print it out. Nurses and doctors love to see my mom coming around, because you're talking about having everything printed out. She can tell you every pill she's on down to the milligram to everything. But it's a blessing. It's a blessing that she is that conscious, and it helps us out with caregiving as well. But Jackson Rice just wants to let you know, Dr. Hickman, Thanks for the shout out. Great presentation. I have enjoyed seeing your rapid rise in nursing research, disparities research, senior academic leadership. Never had a doubt about your future success. I am at the end of my career. You give me great hope for our future. And then Wilma says, this was marvelous, thought-provoking presentation, really into this. And so with that, with our last question, I want to ask you, what does Ron Hickman like to do outside of Case Western Reserve University?
Okay, so I like a lot of things. I'll try to make it PG. I like to cycle. I like to lift weights. I like to drink alcoholic beverages, wine, beer, and make a few of those alcoholic beverages from scratch.
The wine or the beer?
All of the above: meads, wines, beer.
All right. I love it. I love it. See, you have a hidden talent. We could have beatboxing
Chemistry,
with
right?
alcohol.
All biology still.
So I thank you, Ron. I thank you again for taking time to talk with us on Profiles of Inclusive Excellence. And I want to give you an opportunity that if you want to share something with our audience that I have not asked, I want to allow you to do that. I know we didn't talk about Alpha Phi Alpha. We didn't get there, maybe other things, but I just want to give you those last few minutes that if you have anything, thank yous or anything that you want to say, to turn it over to you for a moment.
Well, I want to just close by saying thank you for everyone who's here today. I see a lot of support systems here, former students, colleagues, former colleagues, alums, and I really appreciate your support. Thank you, Heather, for the invitation, and Dr. Wright and Wilma for those remarks that just took me back. So just thank you all, and I look forward to crossing paths with you at some point in this near future.
So thank you. Thank you, Ron. Thank you again for being with us. I will turn things over to Tiara. And I want to say that, and I have to say this because Katie's on the call. A special thank you to Katie Kimball, who has been with us as part of the Profiles of Excellence. It seems like, Tiara, we just keep losing people that work for Profiles.
No.
We lost Crystal. Now we're losing Katie. Katie will no longer be with Case Western Reserve. And so we want to thank Katie on behalf of Profiles of Inclusive Excellence. Thank you for serving in this role and helping me to get at least through the academic year for 2023-24. So we finished with Dr. Hickman. So we do thank you for that, Katie, and thank you for your service to us. Tiara, I'll turn things over to you.
Well, I have to echo all of the sentiments that were just shared here today in this space. Dr. Hickman, thank you. What an incredible conversation. You have my wheels turning. My sister's an alum. She worked in the nursing school for me. I'm like, I have some ideas and we're going to do this. Thank you to Katie again for all that you have done, not only in this space, but for the African American Alumni Association. We appreciate you and we wish you the best. And thank you to each and every person on this call for joining us on this evening. We appreciate you joining the last Profiles of Inclusive Excellence for this academic year. So stay tuned for everything that will happen next year. You can always find out about the African American Alumni Association if you search the CWRU website, or you can find us on Facebook if you search Case Western Reserve University African American Alumni Association, and we will have an Instagram forthcoming. So keep an eye out on all of the things. And with that, thank you so much. We appreciate you attending and have a wonderful rest of your evening.